So friends, we are starting with today's lecture, and in today's lecture we'll be finishing the very first part, that is modernity and social changes in Europe and the emergence of sociology. So the rest of the topic that are pending, we will be talking about French Revolution, Industrial Revolution, then I'll be doing an analysis of modernity, counter-enlightenment movement, then various scholars' name, and then I'll also be giving you a proper flow chart so that you have a proper understanding and you are able to connect each and every dots. Okay, so modernity and social changes in Europe and the emergence of sociology. So before I start with today's lecture, just a brief thing that I've told you. Yesterday I talked about modernity in detail. Then I talked about Renaissance. I talked about Enlightenment. And both these Renaissance and Enlightenment, they are ideological revolution. Remember this thing, because they brought a change in the overall ideas of the people of the society, particularly European society. So they both are ideological revolution. Remember this part, that is Renaissance and Enlightenment. Then I also talked about certain thinkers just like Emmanuel, Joseph Sees, who coined the terminology sociology, then Saint Simon, who used the word social physics, and he was a positivist. Then Auguste Comte, who reinvented the term sociology that was first coined by Emmanuel Joseph Sees and popularized this further, sociology. So the first term for sociology was not sociology, in fact it was social physics. Remember this thing. Okay, and when we talk about modernity, modernity basically encompasses various kind of a revolution, like ideological revolutions. Okay, then you can talk about commercial revolution, scientific revolution, then French Revolution. And this French Revolution basically is also known as institutional revolution, because it brought a change in the overall institutions of society. From dictatorship, now we are moving to basically democratic society. And then we have industrial revolution, which is a technological revolution. If you talk about modernity, it is a culmination of lot of things. These two parts, 3, 4 and 5. And because of all these things, all these different kind of a revolution, be it Renaissance, Enlightenment, commercial, scientific, French, industrial, this led to change in the society. There was a whole change in the overall social fabric of the society, and as a result the chaos was there. And to resolve the chaos prevalent in society, various scholars started reflecting upon the issues, and they started looking to the modernity in their own way. And thus there was a need was felt to resolve the issues, the chaos that are prevalent in society, and thus the need was there for a separate distinct discipline called sociology. Okay, now we'll just move ahead from wherever we left yesterday. I've already talked about in detail modernity, thinkers on modernity, modernization, Renaissance, Enlightenment, structure of old versus new Europe. Then I have talked about at length commercial revolution, scientific revolution, then various scholars associated with scientific revolution. So till here we have completed yesterday. Now we are moving ahead and we'll be talking today about French Revolution. French Revolution. So friend, when we talk about French Revolution, the French society has a feudalistic setup, because we are talking about the France society in medieval era. And in medieval era there was a feudalistic setup. Now what is feudalism? What is feudalism? It's a kind of a socio-economic political system where king is the supreme leader. Thus there is a monarchy. I'm just giving you in a very simple language. There is a proper rigid hierarchical system. Land was central to economic system, and this feudalism is derived from the word fief. Fief means land. And when you talk about feudalism, here the king gives land to the nobles or the vassals, who themselves give land to the serfs, who were the farmers. And in return, like if the serfs were given certain lands by the nobles or the vassals, if the serfs are given certain lands to till, and serfs had the hereditary rights to till the land, nobody can evict them from the land. So in return, serfs will give them or give certain parts of the produce to the nobles, and also provide military services whenever the nobles will ask them to do so. And in return, nobles will provide them a land and also security that nobody could evict them. So this was a kind of a setup that was there in the feudalism. Now when we talk about this French society in medieval era, we will look into things like there's a kind of a three-state system. Three-state system, that was a very rigid hierarchical system was there. State system. By the way, any doubt you have, friends, you can just let me know. So the whole society was divided into feudal states. Three-state system was there, and the first state was clergy. Okay, even in the clergy also there were two systems, that was two subgroups were there, like archbishops and subordinate clergies. It's like priestly classes. So they were seniors and they were juniors, and these subordinate clergies were overburdened with the work. Then second class was there. They were nobility. They were nobles of sword, like nobles by birth, and nobles of robe. They became nobles because they had certain inherent qualities. Because of qualities, they became nobles. Okay, and because they were not nobles by birth, so they were a bit liberal. Then the third state has the majority of the population. This third state has more than 97 to 98% of the population were lying in this third state. So rest of the society, which included peasants, merchants, artisans, others, and all the bankers, shipbuilders, merchants, laborer, everybody, they were falling under the third state. Now the first two states were hardly 1 or 2% of the population, and yet they were controlling majority of the land, and all the tax burdens were lying with the third state. So king was also putting lot of taxes on the third state, so that the first two states, including the king, they can live an opulent kind of a life. So you can simply say that the first two states, including king, they were living like a parasite on the hard work of the third state. Okay, now there were certain political economic conditions also of the French society. Like if you see the political condition, the king had the divine right to rule. Okay, it's the divine right of the king to rule, and nobody could question them. Whatever they said, it was an absolute law. It was an absolute law. And plus king word was an absolute law, nobody could question them. There was a proper nepotism, favoritism. Okay, then the economic conditions are also not good because there was a costly war like between France and Britain. There was so many wars were fought in 1750s and 60s. Then because of all those wars, because of the opulent life that was lived by the first two state, that is king, clergy and nobles, and most of the tax burdens were falling on the third state, so most of the state treasure was empty. So the whole French society, the state treasury becomes bankrupt, and as a result what happened is that the king decided to put a tax burden on the first two state itself also. King decided that even the first two state, that is clergy and the noble, also need to pay the taxes. Okay, now there was series of events that were happening. Now condition, try to understand, there was a feudalistic setup. Okay, king was the supreme leader, and there was a three state system, that was clergy, noble and then commoners. And the commoners, especially the merchant, shipbuilders and all those big businessmen who have become rich by the 17th century because of the commercial revolution. I remember yesterday I talked about in detail about the commercial revolution. So all those big businessmen, they became economically very powerful, very prosperous by 17th century, but still they lacked any kind of a political power because they were a part of third state. So even they were fed up that though they have so much of economic power, they have no say in the state affairs, so they want to control the state affair also. So they also played a very important role as far as changing the overall feudalistic setup is concerned. Okay, so there was series of events that happened, and see, this series of events, this slide is not that much important, this is just for you to understand certain things. I'll just read it out. Like there's a state journal, parliamentary body, which consists of all the three states. When I talk about all the three states, that is clergy, noble and commoners. Remember, all the three states, they have one single vote. They have one single vote. So when a group, when they are meeting, always the commoners will be losing because the first two states, they will be always voting to protect their interest. Okay. So this parliamentary body, which consists of all the three states, it was last time met in 1614. Just imagine. There was not a regular meeting of the parliamentary body which consists of all the three states. So because of the tax imposition, nobles and clergy wanted to meet, but they don't want to meet with the third state because they believe the third state were not of their high, not of their stature. So because of that thing, the third state formed the National Assembly, and meeting was planned in 28 June 1789 at the Hall of Versailles near Paris, and the oath was taken to draw a new constitution. Then this is simply an event, Bastille event, royal prison, symbol of operation, stormed by the mobs in 14 July 1789. Then there was a declaration of rights of men, declaration of the rights of men. This was very important, okay, by the Constituent Assembly, which comprises of the members of the third state and some liberals from the other two states also. See, some liberals were included, like nobles of the robes. Okay, so it guaranteed what? Certain rights were guaranteed, like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom from arbitrary punishments. Kings have no divine right to rule. Okay, all are born equal and right to choose their own government. All these things, these rights were first time recognized, and they were landmark. Okay, that's why we say the Declaration of the Rights of the Man, they were landmark as far as recognize certain rights which should not be taken from the people at any cost. Then in Paris, new legislative assemblies was formed, which has the power to declare war and peace, called for election on the basis of universal suffrage, was formed, declared King Louis XVI traitor, and was beheaded in 1792. Then Directorate was formed, which was established in 1795, but overthrown by Napoleon Bonaparte in 1790, and thus marks the end of French Revolution. Now, since I've talked and told you about the French Revolution, because of French Revolution, there was a change in society. When I'm talking about change in society, I'm talking about change in the French society. So what was the change that occurred because of the French Revolution? First thing is that there was a earlier and after French Revolution. So earlier there was a centralization of power. there was a monarchy. Now there was a decentralization of power. There was kind of democracy. There was a feudalism. Now it led to what? Capitalism. Then there was nepotism. Now the merit system came into being. Individualism was promoted, right? And at the same time, there were significant themes that emerged from French Revolution. First one was there was a transformation of property. And the second thing is social disorder. Why there's a transformation of property? Because in feudalistic setup, everything was owned by the king. Everything was owned by the king. So when the feudalistic setup this was dismantled and the capitalism came into being, now this private property, the notion of private property came into existence. Okay, and now because of the private property, what happened? The whole economic relations changed. The whole economic relations changed. And how it changed? Because earlier when we say economic relations changed, we talk about hereditary rights. Like farmers have the right to till the land. Okay, but now it has changed to what? A new kind of economic relation came into being, that is cash based wage labor. Like you'll be paid a particular salary, and salary will be equivalent to amount of work or quantum of work that you do. Similarly, because of social disorder, there's a lot of chaos in the society. Social disorder, why? Because earlier when there was a monarchy, it was leading to order and stability. And monarchy was, it's not that monarchy was there for some years, it was for hundreds of years, because of which there was an order and stability. So when people started questioning the monarchy, they started questioning the divine right of the king to rule. There's are certain rights that even all the common citizens should have: right to life, right to personal freedom, right to property. Okay, all these things. So as a result, the social fabric started disrupting, and there was a lot of chaos and anarchy in the society. And because of the chaos and anarchy, now certain scholars started thinking that they need a distinct discipline to study society. And what is that distinct discipline? That led to the emergence of a new kind of a discipline called sociology. Okay, so this is how you should connect also, that how French Revolution played an important role as far as emergence of sociology as a distinct discipline is concerned. Okay, even you can say that French Revolution had certain positive things as well. From monarchy, it led to constitutional democracy, right? Then certain other things you can talk about, that there's a declaration of the rights of men. Okay, then there's a role of religion in the society has declined a lot. Rights of men. Then role of religion in society declined. This is how we talk about things. Okay, about the French Revolution. Any doubt till now? Any doubt till now? Now I'll be talking about things like intellectual influences. Okay, very important intellectual influences. And they also played a very important role. Even they played a role in French Revolution, because the philosophers, the kind of ideas that they were propounding, it helped people to go and revolt against the existing order, which was exploitative for most of the people, for majority of the people, especially the commoners, because in European society there's a three-state system. Okay, so there were certain things that I'm just telling you. A scientific approach to study of society dates back to Renaissance and Enlightenment. This I've already explained it to you earlier also. I've talked about various kind of scholars. Okay, whether you talk about William Harvey, we talk about Charles Darwin, we talk about Galileo Galilei, Kepler, Newton. Okay, then study social institutions and suitability for humans. What does it mean? It means that earlier thinkers, they believed that humans are rational in their outlook. Humans are rational in their outlook. And because of this rationality, humans will be able to realize their true potential. So earlier scholars always believe that humans are basically rational in their thinking, and because of this rationality, it will always lead to expression, freedom of thought and expression. But in case if the humans are bounded by social institutions, they will not be able to realize their true potential. They will not be able to realize their true potential. And thinkers believe that humans beings are capable of attaining a perfection. Okay, just combining both these two statements. Suppose I'm talking about certain social institutions, family. We have a joint family system and a nuclear family system. You can apply the logic that suppose if you got a very good career opportunity and you're living in a society which basically always propounds for, always goes for, or there's an existence of joint family system. So this notion is prevalent there. But if you've got a good job opportunity somewhere else, but society itself is not allowing you to break your joint family system, even your family members and kinships are not allowing you to go outside. Okay, that means what? You're not able to realize your true potential. Okay, you're not able to attain perfection. Whatever skills you have, you're not able to achieve greatness. But if a society itself tell you that if you get a good job, whatever skills you have, on the basis of that, if you're getting good job somewhere else, so go ahead and try to achieve excellence in whatever you're doing, even if the joint family system is breaking. It's okay, because society accepts nuclear family system. Okay, like that. Suppose in a political institutions only, there is a dictatorship. Everything controlled by one single ruler. But if there is a democracy, where the type of government is as per the will of the people choose that who should rule over them. So if there is a democracy, so the overall true potential of the people will be realized in this kind of a setup. Okay, so this is what we are talking about. Okay, then last we talk about is other themes where philosophy of history. This is a very important concept, very interesting concept also. Philosophy of history, surveys of social conditions, that is classification of social phenomena, and biological theory of evolution. Okay, I'll take each of them one by one. See, when we talk about philosophy of history, if you look into earlier scholars, I am taking example of Auguste Comte only here, who's the father of sociology. He talked about how society evolved from one stage to another stage. And he gave 3 stages how the society evolves. That is called theological, metaphysical, and positivist. And we simply say it, remember it as a TMP phase. Okay. And what you talk about here is that you're talking about various stages of society. And rationality increases in this direction. So in positivist stage, rationality is highest. Here also rationality is there, but not that much. Here rationality is very less, or you can say it's a completely irrational society. And how you can talk about these things, like suppose if I say that you're writing for a UPSC examination. So if you're living in theological kind of a society and you're not able to clear the examination, what you'll say? That God is angry. All your explanation will be theological in sense, because theology means what? Study of religion. So everything is attributed to God. Okay. If you're not able to clear the examination in this stage, you'll say basically bad luck. A bit of rationality, but at least you're not attributing everything to God. Here, if you're not able to clear the examination in positive state, what you'll say? That you will be very rational, very logical, that I have not completed the syllabus, I was not sincere, or I have not done lots and lots of practices, and because of these things I was not able to clear the examination. So you'll be very logical in your explanation. Okay, you'll be reasoning everything. Okay, you'll not be attributing everything to your luck or your God, right? So this is how you talk about it. And this 3 stages also does not only symbolizes the evolution of society, this also symbolizes evolution of human mind. Evolution of human mind. Even Karl Marx was talking about evolution of society. Like he was saying, the first stage is primitive communism. Then we have ancient society. After this we have feudal society. Then we have capitalistic society. And lastly we have communism. Like this. Okay, so again he was talking about what? This philosophy of history, how over the historical epoch, how the society has evolved from one stage to another stage. Okay, so I'll be talking detail about Karl Marx in our unit 4 of paper 1. Okay, because Karl Marx you have to study in lot of detail. Then comes next thing is survey of the social condition. What do you mean by survey of the social conditions? There we have to classify. Just like now the scholars want to study that why so many people are living in abject poverty, and through proper study they came to a conclusion that this poverty is not natural poverty. Okay, in fact this poverty is caused because of the humans only. It's a man-made poverty, it is not a natural poverty, and it is the humans who are responsible why majority of the people are suffering. They are living in a animalistic kind of a condition. Okay, then biological theory of evolution. You remember I talked about Charles Darwin theory, origin of species, descent of men, like how humans were seen as now the descendant of apes, and they have been evolving through millions of years. From apes now they have converted to humans. Okay, the same analogy is being used here also. Like if you see society, just like if you look here, child, once a child is born, from born child now they become an adult, then old, and then they die. So they are evolving. Similarly even society is evolving. Even like society is evolving from one stage to another stage, like Karl Marx, Auguste Comte, and I'll give you more and more thinkers how this envisage the society will evolve from one stage to another stage. Okay, so theory of evolution. So biological theory. So earlier scholars, like these scholars, they were getting idea from the biology that just like organism evolves from one stage to another stage, even the society also evolves from one stage to another stage. Okay, so that is why these earlier scholars were called positivists, because they were getting inspired from the natural sciences and thus want to use the natural science methodologies to study society, so that they can arrive at a formula that could be plugged in society to create new knowledge, so that the society could be re-engineered to resolve all the chaos that is prevalent in society. Okay, this is how we say. Now These are intellectual influences. Now I'll be talking about very important part, that is intellectual developments that were affecting France. Very important slides, friends. I'll be telling you certain things. Okay. There were certain intellectual developments in France. See, France, just like any other European country, also entered into the era of rationalization, rationality, reasoning. Okay. And there were various philosophers, which I'm going to write it down here. These philosophers, through their ideas, they captured the imagination of the people when they started questioning monarchy, the religious ideologies, the church officials' knowledge, whatever they were propounding. Okay. Now, when we talk about first thing first is John Locke. John Locke, he said that every individual has certain rights which cannot be infringed upon by any king or any ruler. And what were those rights? Right to personal freedom, right to property, right to life. So, personal freedom, right to live, right to property. And he said that any king who is trying to infringe or take over these rights, all the people have all the rights to throw away that ruler or the king, and in place of that king they should restore another king who can protect these rights of the people. So just imagine, in earlier era, in maybe 17th century, when they were propounding all this kind of an ideology. Okay. Yet another thing is Montesquieu, a very famous book, The Spirit of Law. He himself said that there should be no concentration of authority in one hand. In one hand. Just like legislative, executive, judiciary, one person should not exercise all the power. Okay. Because it will lead to what? It will lead to complete anarchy. Okay. Dictatorship. And you can find it. We talk about our Article 50, where we talk about separation of power. This Article 50 is inspired from the idea of Montesquieu. So wherever we talk about separation of power in the famous work of Montesquieu, it has its genesis, right? So separation of power, that no person or no authority should exercise all the powers. And thus here he also talked about liberty of individuals. And he was also critical of French monarchy because the power was concentrated only in the hands of a king. So separation of power in those era was a very radical idea. Okay. Then comes Voltaire. Now Voltaire also propounded certain things, certain ideologies, and he talked about freedom of religion. He talked about religious toleration. Okay. And he said that religion crushed the human spirit because religion exploit what? Religion exploit the ignorance and superstition of a human. And he also talked about separation of church from state. So even in 17th century he was talking about religious toleration, separation of church from state, freedom of religion, and he was always critical of religion because religion exploits the overall ignorance and superstition of the people. Then comes yet another very famous philosopher, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Now Jean-Jacques Rousseau, his very famous book was Social Contract. Social contract. And what he was saying is that all the people, the common people, they have the right to choose their own sovereign. Because if the government that is ruling over the country is decided by the common people, then that government will be able to protect the interest of the common people. Okay. So all the people have the right to choose their own sovereign government. And he also introduced the concept of general will through his notion of social contract, general will, which means that government should be run as per the will of the people. Okay, and he also gave French society the concept of democracy, and even he was critical of French society because of the tyrannical rule. So just imagine John Locke, Montesquieu, Voltaire, Rousseau, okay, in their 17th, 18th century, the kind of ideology that they were propounding. It was a very, very radical ideas, okay, in those era. Then there was Adam Smith also, Wealth of Nations. Now what this Adam Smith was saying, he was talking about laissez-faire economy. He was supporting laissez-faire economy, that there should be no intervention of government in the market, and thus he was supporting capitalism. That law of supply and demand should determine the price of goods and services. And he also said that all the industries should be given a free hand to set up and run their industries, because if they will be given a free hand, there's a kind of a lot of benefits that will accrue, okay, because it will be generating a lot of employment, the quality of the life of the people will be or the standard of life or the quality of life of the people will be increasing. Okay, this is how he's talking about the notion of invisible hand. Invisible hand. And he was also propounding, Adam Smith was also propounding for progressive taxation. Progressive taxation. Okay, and there are certain other thinkers that I want to talk about here is like Mary Wollstonecraft. Okay, Mary Wollstonecraft Mary Wollstonecraft, one of the foremost feminist. She wrote a book on vindication of the rights of women. And she talks about the right of women, okay, because even those earlier philosophers who were talking about the modern rise of modern state, the state laws should be liberal, the overall aim of the state should be to protect the interest of the common people, the state should not be tyrannical, there should be democracy and all those things they were talking about. But they were also focusing upon certain things, though they were talking about that women should be educated, but they were talking in a very restricted manner, because they were saying that though women should be educated, but that education should be focused upon that how to be a good wife. So Mary Wollstonecraft was also critical of those initial philosophers, that they were talking about women right but in a very restricted manner. And thus she talks about education, right of women to education, right to vote, property. And she said that women should get educated and enter the male dominated areas and thus bring a social change in society, social change or social transformation in society. And she also said that what state does to its citizens, this is visible, but what man does to women is not visible. So just such a powerful statement that she passed on. Okay, and Mary Wollstonecraft, she talked about all those things in the 18th century, primarily in the second half of the 18th century. Okay, then yet another thinker that you can talk about here is Alex de Tocqueville. Alex de Tocqueville. And even Alex de Tocqueville, because earlier I've talked about Rene Descartes, Machiavelli. Okay, all those things you can add here also. Tocqueville was talking about egalitarianism, individualism, liberty, all those things. Egalitarianism. Like we should have an egalitarian society. Everybody should be treated equal. Then liberty of an individual. Then you can also talk about things like individualism. Individuals should be given all the freedom to hone their personality, to realize their true potential. You can even talk about certain scholars like a Renaissance scholar only, Martin Luther King. And he was the one who was a German, and way back in early 16th century was talking about overall reformation of the church. Reformation of the church, because he found out that the church officials were living an opulent life, so there was so much of corruption and everything. So this is how these kind of a scholars also you can add. Okay, so this was overall, I was talking about the intellectual influences, a very important slide. You must add all these thinkers named Tocqueville, philosophers, whatever you want to call them, Mary Wollstonecraft, Martin Luther, then Montesquieu, John Locke, Voltaire, Rousseau, Adam Smith. Okay, now any doubt till here? Any doubt, friends? Now I'm going to the industrial revolution, the last thing that I'm going to talk about. By the way, this French Revolution is a kind of an institutional revolution. Okay, now industrial revolution is also known as technological revolution. And this industrial revolution, it basically signifies a fundamental change in the way goods were produced. Okay, because earlier the human labor, the animate source of energies, the animals, the humans, they were used to produce certain goods, their energies were used. But now there's a fundamental change in the way goods were produced, because inanimate sources of energies were now used to make the goods, and these goods were made in, there was a kind of a mass production of all those goods. Okay, so fundamental change in the way goods were produced. So now inanimate sources of energy was used. Earlier human labor, animal energy, all those things were used. Okay, so fundamental change, and there was always focus upon mass production of goods. Right now, certain important, just a factual information, begin around 1760-18 in England, and there are certain new inventions. This you can simply go through: spinning jenny, arkwright water frame, then spinning mule. They were all used for the textile industry. What is more important is the significant themes of the industrial revolution. Significant themes. Now whenever we talk about, first thing is the condition of the labor. See, when there was an industrial revolution, what happened? The industries were popping up. Industries were set up in the cities, right? So when the industries were set up in the cities, for certain section of the society, the quality of life increased, standard of living increased many folds for certain section of society who were prosperous. So certain place in a society was resembling prosperity, okay, overall growth, but at the same time it led to certain issues, and those issues were like, majority of the population, they were facing an issue of housing, They were facing an issue of slum, poverty, exploitation, suicide rate were high, crimes, crime rate were high. All these issues started popping up. So though they were, you can see, islands of prosperity in the oceans of poverty, this was the thing, a state of affair in those time. Okay, and all those things that we say, housing issues, slums, they all became a subject matter of sociology, because now sociologists want to study why these things are happening, how to resolve all these issues. Okay, so workers, majority of the people, like workers, they were living in inhuman conditions, their wages were very low, there was no social security benefits. But at the same time, these majority of the workers emerged as a very powerful social base, because without them the industries could not run. So this is the kind of, you can talk about, under condition of labor. Second thing is, there was a transformation of property. Earlier everything was owned by the king. Now there is an emergence of private property. Now the focus is upon maximize profit, surplus generation. Okay, and the relationship is also of became subordination and domination. Majority of the people were exploited, all these things you can say, and the land lost its value as a main commodity. Capital becomes the main commodity here. Okay, then comes the industrial city, urbanism. When you talk about the industrial city, like more and more industries started popping up in the cities, and Manchester of England, it was a hub, it was a textile hub. Okay, and here also you can say that urban areas, only few of the population, few percentage of the population were enjoying having a lavish opulent life, but most of them, they were living in a very mysterious condition, misery, poverty, exploitation, discrimination, everything was there. So again, because of all those things, the scholars started pondering on the issue, how to resolve these issues. Okay, how to resolve all the problems, and thus they started talking about that we need a separate distinct discipline, and that distinct discipline could be used to resolve the problems prevalent in society. And then comes the technology and the factory system. When you talk about the technology and the factory system, a kind of a clockwork started developing. Clockwork means that when the bell rings, they'll take a break, when the bell rings, they'll again come back to the work. Okay, so each and every minute they were supervised by the managerial class, like that. Okay, they were completely supervised by the managerial class. And here also, because everything was decided by the managerial class or the bourgeoisie class, so nothing was in the hand of the common people. And as a result, what happened, it led to de-skilling of work. It led to de-skilling of work. And because of de-skilling, because everything, like what product to be made, how much it to be made, what should be the design, everything was decided by the owners or the managerial class. Workers were keep on doing the same thing again and again, like a mechanical kind of a work that they were doing, without any innovativeness, without any creativity. So it led to de-skilling of work. As a result, there was an alienation. They were detached from themselves. They were not enjoying their work. They're simply doing the work so that they can get certain wage and they can fend for themselves and for their family. Even the wage was so much low that apart from men, the women and even the children has to come and work in the industry, slogging for so many hours per day. Okay, so this was overall, you can talk about the industrial revolution. Okay, so before I move ahead, I'll just add certain things that will be quite beneficial for you. I'll just talk about pre-industrial economy and economy after industrial revolution. So pre-industrial economy and economy after industrial revolution. So first thing you can talk about is that It was an agricultural economy. Land was the main commodity here. Then they were handmade products. Then we have home and workplace were same, because earlier there was no industries, everybody is working from their home only. People stayed in rural areas only. Then division of labor was very low. Then transportation using animal power. Okay, but what happened, how the society changed post industrial revolution? You can talk about things like industrial economy, there was a capitalism with focus on mass production or surplus generation. Then profit maximization. Then we have home and workplace got separated. Then there was an urbanization, because of which the migration started happening. Then invention of steam engine, which revolutionized transportation. Then inanimate source of energy, for mass production like machine made goods. Okay, these are all easy points. Then there's complex division of labor. You can see an example here in assembly line production. Then after that we have a standardized products. And lastly is rise of managerial class. The rise of managerial class, and these managerial class, they were very professional in nature, and their idea line is to make sure that everything is streamlined, efficiency is ensured, and people, they are doing optimum amount of work so that profit could be accrued by the bourgeoisie class. Okay, so all those managerial class, they were managing the industries on the behalf of bourgeoisie class. Okay, so this was about the industrial revolution, pre-industrial economy, and the economy after industrial revolution. Any doubt till now? Okay, now I'll give you certain more information. See, till here we have completed our whole topic, that is overall modernity, and then social changes in Europe and emergence of sociology as a separate discipline. And now we will talk about certain, I'll give you certain more information. Just a minute. So we will talk about things like analysis of modernity. Analysis of modernity. I'll just help you understand things. See, I told you ancient era Then comes medieval era, and in medieval era there were certain things that were happening, okay, like Renaissance, then Enlightenment, then you can talk about various intellectual influences, you can talk about scientific revolution, you can talk about commercial revolution, you can talk about French Revolution, you can talk about the industrial revolution, okay, even counter enlightenment movement. I'll talk about this counter enlightenment movement. So all those things could be clubbed under modernity, because all these things led to what? Modernity. And it has various features, just like you can talk about secularism, individualism, equality, okay, merit based system, democracy, capitalism, all these things you can add on here. Okay, there are simple things that you can add upon here. You can talk about equality, fraternity, scientific temper, equality, fraternity, scientific temper, and etc. Now because of these things which are a part of modernity, what happened? There were certain positive things happening, certain negative things happening. Positive matlab because there was a hope for a better future. So some scholars started celebrating modernity. Yes, modernity is good. Why? Because now we have equality, merit, democracy, certain things. But at the same time, it brought certain negative consequences also, because it disrupted the whole order and stability that were prevalent in society. Because feudalism was able to maintain order and stability, so whenever the modernity was occurring, it completely disrupted the whole social fabric. So some scholars who were celebrating modernity, there were other scholars who were not celebrating modernity. Okay, and because of these things, especially, there was a chaos. And to resolve the issue of chaos, sociology as a separate discipline emerged. And there were certain things, intellectual themes or scientific themes that I talked about, is philosophy of history. Philosophy of history, remember in previous slide I talked about, few slides back. Then you can talk about biological theory of evolution, then survey of social phenomena. All these things you can talk about. Okay, and that's everybody was reflecting, different set of scholars, they were reflecting upon modernity. Some were celebrating modernity, some were not celebrating modernity. Okay, now comes the counter enlightenment. See, there were certain scholars who were not celebrating modernity, because there were scholars who were celebrating modernity, and they believed that whatever chaos is there, this chaos is temporary in nature, and we could resolve this chaos by doing the scientific study of society, and through scientific study they can come up with a formula to resolve the problems of society. But there were certain scholars who were not celebrating modernity, and I'm writing two thinkers here, Joseph de Maistre and Louis de Bonald. They were basically the church officials only. These scholars were basically the church officials only. So just imagine how much orthodox they will be. So they were completely against modernity. They were completely against any kind of enlightenment. They were completely against things like French Revolution, Renaissance. Okay, because they were not supporting modernity. So they were against modernity. Because, and like Renaissance, Enlightenment, French Revolution, they were not at all supporting all these things. because they believed that all these things led to chaos, and they believed that in order to restore order and stability, we need to go back to medieval era. Go back to medieval era. So go back to the old days, then only there will be order and stability in society. Okay, because modernity, this French Revolution, Enlightenment, Renaissance, they are leading to what? Chaos and anarchy in the society. So let's go back to the medieval era, where there were certain institutions like monarchy, joint family system, patriarchy, and etc. So he said these people were started saying that do not question these kind of institutions, because they were helping to maintain order and stability in society. And do not question God, because God has only made humans, God has only made society. So what they were talking about, like what church officials used to say, okay, before Renaissance and Enlightenment, that God has made human, God has made society, these institutions are indispensable part of the society because they are helping to maintain order and stability in society. So these two scholars, they said that we need to maintain order and stability in society, so let's go back to the old way of living, that is medieval era. Okay, let's not jump to the capitalistic system, let's not have a new economical relationship, land should be the central theme. So when they talk about monarchy, joint family system, this, so what happened is that their main focus, remember this counter-enlightenment scholars, their main focus was order and stability. All they want order and stability in society. It's not that the enlightenment thinker doesn't want order and stability, they also want, but here for them the main focus is order and stability, and do whatever you want. And for them to achieve order and stability, to achieve that there is complete sustenance of society, so social fabric does not break down, let's go back to the old era. Okay, so this is what you can talk about the counter-enlightenment movement. Okay, do not question the old age institutions, because they were very much necessary overall to maintain order and stability in society. Now, in case a question comes that what was the role of counter-enlightenment as far as emergence of sociology as a separate discipline is concerned, so here you need to say that when it comes to focus or goal, this was provided by counter enlightenment movement. But when it comes to means to achieve order and stability, this was provided by enlightenment movement. And they both helped in the emergence of sociology as a separate discipline. As a separate discipline. I'll explain this thing again. We require distinct discipline, and that role of distinct discipline is basically to achieve order and stability in society. Okay, order and stability in society. So when you talk about distinct discipline to achieve order and stability in society, what is the means? What is the mean? Like, what is the methodology that should be used to generate new knowledge? That mean was provided by enlightenment thinkers, the positivists, who were saying that use scientific methodologies to generate new knowledge. And this new knowledge will help to come up with a universal formula. And once this universal formula comes into being, then the overall problems of society would be resolved. And this will come where? When we have sociology as a separate discipline. But the main focus that sociology needs to be popped up, or new discipline is required. Why? because then only you'll be able to study society in a scientific manner, and the main goal, focus, or the end is to achieve order and stability, or restore order and stability. And this was focused by counter-enlightenment movement. So it is not that counter-enlightenment did not play any role at all as far as emergence of sociology as a separate discipline is concerned. Okay, the role of counter-enlightenment and enlightenment both is necessary as far as sociology as a separate discipline is concerned. Right? Any problem with respect to this part? Any doubts? Now, overall, I have told you about things, certain things which are important. Now I'm just telling you certain factual informations. Okay, certain factual information. Like first one is Auguste Comte. See, Auguste Comte, also known as the founding father of sociology, okay, who was also a positivist, and he wrote the book Positive Philosophy. Okay, so he was a positivist. Book name is Positive Philosophy. And he also wanted to use scientific methodology to study society, want to establish science of society, science of society. And whatever Auguste Comte was saying, even here Emile Durkheim was saying the same thing, even Herbert Spencer was saying the same thing, that they want to use scientific methodology to study society, they want to establish science of society. Okay, but Herbert Spencer also gave an organic analogy that I've already explained to you earlier. Emile Durkheim, though earlier Saint-Simon, Auguste Comte, what they were talking about, use of scientific methodology to study society. But how to deploy scientific methodology to study society? This tradition was established by Emile Durkheim. Remember that thing. Okay. Then comes Harriet Martineau. Harriet Martineau basically is credited with introduction of sociology in England. Remember that thing. And she compiled the work of Auguste Comte into 2 volumes. So, compiled work of Auguste Comte into 2 volumes and credited with introducing sociology in England. Then comes the Karl Marx. See, Karl Marx also developed a very radical theory based on his notion of economic inequality. Okay, theory on the basis of economic inequality. And I've told you the stage also. The first stage as per Karl Marx is primitive communism, truly classless society. Then class starts impairing from ancient society, then feudal society, then capitalist society. Then next is the communist society. Communist society is again a completely classless egalitarian society. Max Weber was talking about things like, while developing a theory, while understanding any social phenomena, while understanding any social action, always focus upon individual meanings and motives. Always focus upon individual meanings and motives. Okay, which means that every individuals, they are designed differently, right? Every individuals are designed differently, and when you talk about each and every individual, they have the consciousness. They are not like a mechanical robot, so they react differently to a particular situation. So you cannot come up with a general formula to define a human behavior. Okay, you cannot represent the human behavior, you cannot study human behavior in a patterned manner, because everyone is designed differently. So that is why we need to understand each and every individual psychic level to understand how will they behave and why they are behaving in that particular manner. Okay, then we talk about spread of sociology in USA and other society, just like Lester F. Ward. So again, this is a very factual thing. Lester F. Ward was the first systematic American sociologist, and differentiated between pure and applied sociology. Pure and applied sociology, and wanted to develop theories to resolve the issues prevalent in society. Next is Jane Addams. Jane Addams, also one of the earlier sociologists who combined the role of sociologist with that of social reformer. So she combined the role of sociologist with of social reformer. There's not much of analysis, these are factual information. Okay. And next one is Margaret Sanger, again a very noted social reformer. And what she did is that she applied theories, sociological theories, to the problems of sociological theories to the problem of health, population, and women. Then comes Talcott Parson. Talcott Parson will be studying in lot of detail, and Talcott Parson wanted to develop a grand theory. Remember, he wanted to develop a grand theory, a particular formula, a universal formula which could be able to solve all the problems of prevalence in society. So he always wanted to develop a grand theory. While criticizing Talcott Parson, R.K. Merton said that we should not develop grand theory, we should always go for middle range theories. Middle range theory. Okay, we will discuss in detail about Talcott Parson and R.K. Merton in our unit 4, because these are the thinkers that forms a part of our paper 1 syllabus. Okay, now this is simply a chart, and you can see here about the sociologists in different countries. Like in France, I have mentioned about Montesquieu, Rousseau, Saint-Simon, Comte, Tocqueville, Durkheim. We'll be discussing about this Durkheim part in lot of detail in the upcoming lectures, especially in unit 4. Then Louis Althusser, Baudrillard will be discussing there are certain small concepts that are associated with them. Then in Germany we have Kant, Hegel, Feuerbach. We'll be discussing, giving small concepts about them in the upcoming lectures. Karl Marx, I have talked about Karl Marx, Max Weber, okay. William Dilthey I'll be talking about later. Then Alfred Schutz, Horkheimer, Habermas, Frankfurt School of Thought. Okay. Then Italy, Pareto, Moscow. I'll be discussing about Pareto and Moscow in our unit 7, where we talked about politics society in our paper 1. Then again in Britain we talked about Spencer. Then Anthony Giddens. We'll talk about Anthony Giddens in our later slide. Then in USA we have Mead, G.H. Mead will be discussing lot of detail because this is part of our course. Parsons also, Merton also will be discussing. And then in Indian paper we'll be discussing about Ghure, Dumont, Betley, Desai, Srinivas will be discussing lot of detail. Now, I'll be just giving you a complete overall flow chart so that you have a proper understanding. Okay, proper understanding, so that you are able to connect everything. So first thing is, there was a medieval era. Now in this medieval era, various events started happening, like Renaissance, then you have commercial revolution, you have scientific revolution, okay, and all these things led to kind of intellectual influences, because of which there was enlightenment, there was French Revolution, then there was Industrial Revolution, Industrial Revolution, okay. I think you're able to understand things because I've told you all these things in a chronological manner only. Now, because of this thing, it led to what? Modernity. Okay. So because of modernity, there were certain positive things that were happening. Okay. But what was important is that there was a chaos. There was chaos. And now because of chaos, there was enlightenment thinkers. Their response was there. And then there was a counter-enlightenment movement. Their response, and counter-enlightenment thinkers like Joseph de Maistre, Louis de Bonald, remember their name please. Okay. And both these things led to the emergence of separate distinct discipline called sociology. And please remember the intellectual themes also, that is philosophy of history, survey of social conditions, and lastly is biological theories of evolution. Okay. So this is how we talk about things, sociology. Okay. This is an overall gist about how we discussed each and everything. We discussed about Renaissance, we discussed about commercial revolution, scientific revolution, we talked about intellectual influences, enlightenment, French Revolution, industrial revolution. We talked about modernity, we did the analysis of the modernity also. We talked about the enlightenment thinkers, we talked about counter-enlightenment movement and how sociology came into being. And we talked about this intellectual influences also. Okay, and the themes. So this was overall the essence and the flowchart through which you can understand the whole unit or whole subunit. Now friends, with this we have completed the whole lecture. That is, overall we talk about emergence, social changes in Europe, modernity and emergence of sociology as a distinct discipline. Any doubt till now? Anybody who has any kind of a doubt? Now I'll just show you certain things. Let's discuss certain PYQs before I wrap up today's session. Just look at the question. I'll give you 2 minutes to think over this question. What aspects of enlightenment do you think paved the way for the emergence of sociology? Elaborate. Now, once we have completed this whole lecture, I think this kind of a question will become quite easy for you. Just recall whatever I have told you with respect to enlightenment. Okay, and how enlightenment is leading to the emergence of sociology as a distinct discipline. Okay, so just think for 2 minutes and then I'll give you a proper thought framework. Okay, I'll just give you an idea. I'll not be giving you a proper answer. I'll just giving you a thought framework. Okay. And even anybody who has any kind of a doubt, they can ask. I'll clarify the doubt. What aspects of enlightenment do you think paved the way for emergence of sociology? I think after seeing the lecture, you might have a proper understanding what enlightenment is, and then how enlightenment and the philosophies associated with enlightenment led to the emergence of sociology as a separate discipline. And this is a 20 marker. Okay, so you have to write within a 250 words. So just think, do a bit of introspection, just recall whatever content we have done. So I'll be just giving you a bit of thought framework, but this is just a tendency. Okay, just look into the thought framework. First, I talked about the introduction part, that the enlightenment, the great age of reason. Whenever you talk about the enlightenment, use this word definitely, age of reason, where you start talking about rise of modern state. Okay, how to change the laws so that it becomes conducive for the overall common citizens of the country. Okay, their rights are protected. Okay, they are able to rise their true potential. Okay, and this is defined as the period of rigorous scientific, political, philosophical discourse that characterized European society during the 17th and 18th century. This is the definition that I've already given to you. Okay, so just you can copy paste here. When we talk about the enlightenment, how it paved the way for the emergence of sociology as distinct discipline, we need to talk about from the intellectual point of view. Okay, because a 20 marker, so you also need to talk about from the intellectual point of view, and here you start quoting various thinkers that I have given it to you. Okay, John Locke, Montesquieu, Voltaire, Rousseau, Niccolo Machiavelli, Alex de Tocqueville. Even you can also talk about Mary Wollstonecraft that I've missed here. Right? You can even talk about Rene Descartes. Okay, and after talking about these things, I have mentioned also a role of various other revolutions. Okay, especially French Revolution, scientific revolution must be there. Even American Revolution has to be there, because from there the French people, they imported the idea of liberty, equality, fraternity. Okay, the right of the people to choose their own government. So these three revolution must be there. And then not only enlightenment, just make a brief, you can say an introduction or the brief mention about counter-enlightenment. These two thinkers name has to be there, and then your answer will become holistic and with a proper conclusion. And see how I've written the conclusion. You can make your own conclusion, but it should be as per the demand of the question. Enlightenment as a movement helped whole world in general and Western Europe in particular move away from religion, superstition, myths, and focus on reason and logic. This helped in development of a new distinct discipline called sociology. Okay, so with a crisp proper introduction, crisp proper conclusion, and the main body catering to the demand of the question. Okay, so I've just given you a tendency, certain fodder points. Let's look into the next question, and probably the last question of today's session, and after this I'll be wrapping it up. Discuss the historical antecedents of the emergence of sociology as a discipline. A short note kind of a question asked in 2019. Yes, 2019. Any doubt you have, please do let me know. So just read the question. More or less the content will be same. Okay, discuss the historical antecedents of the emergence of sociology as a separate discipline. First of all, this is a short note kind of a question. Remember this thing. But at the same time, they are talking about a very broad terminology, historical antecedents. You have to mention about each and everything. making sure that you do not miss anything, because each and everything, especially certain revolution, has to come, like Renaissance, Enlightenment, Scientific Revolution, French Revolution, Industrialization. Everything has to come, and when you talk about all of them in a brief manner, and then you make a conclusion that how all of them lead to chaos or modernity, and modernity led to chaos, and then that helped in overall emergence of sociology as separate discipline. So when you write mention about all those things, automatically your answer will become holistic. So let's look into the thought framework. See, I have talked about first the introduction part, that Western Europe witnessed plethora of events since 15th century that resulted in chaos and disorder in society. That started with Renaissance, and that changes the outlook of members of society and culminated with French Revolution. So very simple definition, introduction that I've given to you. Now, when I talk about the historical antecedents, see, I have talked about each and every important revolution so that you do not miss anything. Okay, I've talked about Renaissance. You have to need to mention about Renaissance. You have to talk about commercial revolution, scientific revolution. When you talk about scientific revolution, make sure you mention certain scholars' name, like Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, Newton. You must mention. Enlightenment phase. When you talk about Enlightenment phase, mention certain philosophers' name: John Locke, Montesquieu, Voltaire, Mary Wollstonecraft, and all those things. Then French Revolution, that how it led to the overall constitutional monarchy. Okay, and ultimately the overall importance of religion in the society decreased. Okay, all these things we can talk about. Then Industrial Revolution, because of chaos, how the need for a distinct discipline was felt urgently, so that the problems prevalent in society could be resolved. Okay, then if you talk about all those things, then you also talk about things like overall the impact, like social disorder, urbanism, technology, factory system, changes in family kinship, condition of labor. Okay, and then a brief crisp conclusion, reaction from both enlightenment and counter conservative thinkers. When I talk about conservative, they are nothing but counter enlightenment movements like Louis de Bonald and Joseph de Maistre. Towards changed socio-political economic condition led to urgent need for separate distinct discipline called sociology. And with this, if you complete all, if you write all these things, I think you'll be able to score a good marks for this particular question. Okay. So now, does anybody has any kind of a doubt? Because with this, we have completed today's session. Okay, friends, then we mark the end of today's session. And with this today's session, we have completed the very first subunit of Unit 1 of Paper 1, that is Modernity, Social Changes in Europe, and Emergence of Sociology as a separate discipline. And tomorrow we will talk about the scope of sociology. Okay, so thank you and all the best.